Hi, I'm Chad Atkins, and this is the 2017 CSPC conference in Ottawa, Canada. I'm thrilled today to be joined by Professor J.S. Moore from the Laval University. J.S., welcome.
All right, thanks you.
So the first question I'll have is tell us a little bit about your research direction, why it's important, why it interests you.
Okay, so I'm an evolutionary ecologist interested in migratory fishes, particularly ones that live in the Arctic. I've spent the last 10 years of my work mostly working on a species called Arctic Char, which is a species that's of great importance for food security and culture in northern Canada. It's also in some communities a fish that's fished commercially, so therefore providing money, income, and employment in some communities. And so the work that we do hopefully informs the sustainable management of these fisheries and also attempts to predict the impact or the response of the species to climate change. And the tools that we use, so I, by background, am someone that works in population genetics, and so we use genetic and genomic tools to try to track some of those questions, so how fish adapt to their environment and also allowing us to assign fish to their population of origin so we can track their movements. We also use a technology called acoustic telemetry, which allows us to track the movements of fish through the marine and the freshwater environment.
Cool, so I want to ask you, you mentioned the Canadian Arctic.
Yes.
So how important is it for your work to include the voices of the Indigenous and Inuit communities? That's obviously a big part of your work, so is that relevant to what you think you're doing? And
yeah, it's totally relevant. I'd like to do more in that regard, but we've tried in our work to make sure to include their knowledge. I talked this morning about this a little bit, but before we started the project that I was particularly talking about in Cambridge Bay, we made sure to have community consultations, but also interviews. And the way that I talked about it is as academics, before we start on a new question, we scour the literature to look for relevant papers that try to help us build our objectives and formulate our hypotheses. I think that as people working on wildlife issues in the north, part of being a good scholar and good scholarship is to go and interview the people that are there that have a lot of knowledge related to these issues that they can share with us and therefore help us in building a better science project.
Out of curiosity, do you ever feel like you receive any resistance from the communities, or are they very willing to have you come in and do some of the work that you do, or is there ever any tension, or is there ever any uncertainty?
I haven't personally experienced any tension in my work. I have heard of a lot of stories like that, so I think that exists. There's obviously some very important historical reasons for that we need to consider as scientists coming up there. In the particular community where I did most of my recent work in Cambridge Bay, we were really welcomed with open arms. People were interested in the work that we're doing and had great input.
And do you hope to ever see any firsthand, maybe any policy outcomes that are a result of your work, or is that something that is maybe not necessarily the goal, but it might be a positive benefit after the fact, or is that?
Yeah, I'd like to see more of that actually. So I can't say that our work has had any sort of specific impacts on policy, but we've had some findings that we think have bearing on existing policies. It's not something that I'm actually very competent in navigating that world. The work that we do is related to fisheries, so policy related to that is Fisheries and Oceans Canada. I work with a lot of guys from, and women, from Fisheries and Oceans Canada, but they're all in the science branch, and the management branch is a completely different thing in DFO. And so sometimes the two don't really talk to each other, but our findings regularly make their way into science advisory documents, but hasn't had an impact yet on policy.
So you mentioned to me this is your first time at this conference, correct?
It is, yeah.
Do you think that at some point this could have some value in forming some of those connections for you, in terms of the right people to talk to, or the right people from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans that might have people here that you could make those connections with?
Perhaps, I haven't looked specifically for their presence. Definitely, I was also really interested in learning about how to navigate these things and
Yeah.
getting some specific cues from
Yeah,
some
yeah.
of the sessions.
Cool.
So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So JS, tell us. I mean, if any grad students at home are listening to this interview, how could they contact you? How could they find out more about your work?
Well, they could contact me by email. You can find me online if you
Yeah.
just Google my name, Jean
Okay.
Sebastien Moore. Yes, please send me an email. I'd love to hear about you.
Perfect. Thanks so much for having this conversation, JS.
Yeah, thanks
Great
a
to
lot.
meet you.
Good to meet you as
Great
well.
to meet you.
Take care.